Some of you are being taken advantage of because you don't know your left from right. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. Before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First, like the video, subscribe to it. If you happen to be on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see that there's a bell for notifications. Go ahead and click that bell. It notifies you the next time we come out with a video. If you happen to be on Rumble, to your upper right-hand corner, you're going to see that there's a share button. Go ahead and click on it, and it allows you to share with a friend who should have joined us today. Go ahead and do all those that apply right now. Exposing the lie of left and right politics, that's the focus of today's podcast. Well, we got a lot here to unpack today, so much stuff that I actually had to write it down, so bear with me as I go through this agenda for you, okay? First of all, we're going to talk about the word that everyone uses but can't seem to define. We're going to talk about why the word has become popular. We're going to talk about how the media covers for the left. We're going to talk about the history of fascism and its founder, why fascism is on the left and not the right. We're going to talk about the motivation for this lie. And finally, we'll wrap up everything by talking about why 2016 changed everything. There's a word we've been using a lot lately. It's not a new word. It's been around since the late 19th, early 20th century, but it's definitely made a reappearance in the last, 4 or 5 years, ever since Trump was elected. I've heard this word tossed around by the media, and it's also being tossed around by a few leftist friends of mine. But the problem that I'm noticing is that very few people who are using the word even know what the heck they're talking about. It's become the word that everyone uses, but very few people can ever seem to define. Do you know the word I'm talking about?
Let's talk about that other F word, the one that doesn't get talked about enough.
Fascism. Could it happen here? That's a question increasingly being raised as Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump continues his bid for the White House.
In today's news cycle, no person is called a fascist more than this man, Donald Trump.
That scares me, and it should scare you too.
Now, the word fascism has become popular again merely because Trump is a Republican. There's a well-known lie out there that says fascism is somehow a product of the right. Google the word fascism, and the first few words you're going to see is the phrase far right. As a matter of fact, it's pretty difficult for you to look up the word fascism without having the word right somehow associated with it. Have you ever heard the phrase right-wing fascist before? Then you know what I mean. But have you ever heard the phrase left-wing fascist before? Probably not. I wonder why. Someone recently asked me to watch a Netflix documentary called How to Become a Tyrant. I was exactly 9 minutes and 18 seconds into the segment about Hitler when the documentary said, and I quote, "Hitler gets a job as an army intelligence officer. His first assignment, observe a meeting of an anti-Semitic right-wing group called the German Workers' Party." There it is again, right-wing fascism. Well, if it's on Google and it's on Netflix and it's on the news and it's taught in your history books and in school, then it must be true, right? Let me give you an analogy. Now, without me identifying these individuals, you probably already know who they are. Microsoft and Apple are both computer companies, but even though they're computer companies, I think we'd all agree that they're still quite different from each other. Suppose I came along and told you that Steve Jobs was the inventor of a product called Windows. What would you say? You'd probably say, no, Rob, you made a mistake. Windows isn't a product that belongs over there with Steve Jobs on the right. It's a product that belongs over there to the left with Bill Gates and Microsoft. But what if CNN told you Steve Jobs invented Windows? What if it was on Netflix? What if it was in the news? What if they taught it to you in school? Would it change your mind then? Probably not, and the reason why is because you have a solid knowledge base. You know more than just the product name. You know what the product is. You know what the product does. You know the company name. You know the founders. You even know their history. So given all that you know, it would be pretty difficult, if not impossible, for someone to shake your education level with a statement so trivial as to say that Windows is a product that belongs on the right. You'd say, nice try, but Windows belongs on the left, not the right. If someone actually were trying to convince you of something like this, two things would probably cross your mind. The first thing would probably be, what's wrong with you guys? How could you get this so wrong? I thought everybody knew this. But after you calm down, the second thought that crossed your mind would be, what are you trying to pull here? In other words, what's your motivation for keeping up this lie? Well, obviously, the scenario that I just mentioned is not true. I just created it to illustrate a point. Your confidence couldn't be shaken because you were knowledgeable in every way. But how confident would you be if you didn't know who the founders were? What if you had heard of Windows but never had any personal experience with it before? What if you had only briefly heard of the companies but didn't know their histories? Would you be as confident then? Probably not. For 4 years, I had to listen to everyone toss around this word fascism without them ever discussing who the founder was. Oh, you don't know who the founder of fascism is either? Let me introduce you to Giovanni Gentile. Gentile was an intellectual, and he was also an advisor to Mussolini. If you weren't already aware, Mussolini was a socialist, and he was kind of a mentor to this guy out of Germany by the name of Adolf Hitler. Hitler was also a socialist. In fact, the original name of Hitler's group when he joined was called the German Workers' Party. Both Mussolini and Gentile were socialists, and they were avid followers of Karl Marx. However, they had a fundamental complaint about the premise of Marxism. Marxism is a political philosophy rooted in class distinctions. Marx's theory was that one day the poor proletariat would rise up in revolt against the bourgeois class of the rich. But Gentile and Mussolini both called BS on this theory. They had yet to see any uprising from the poor, let alone a revolution. In their observation, men never gave their lives over class, but they did give their lives over their country. It was out of this discussion that they found the need for a new version of socialism, a socialism 2.0, if you will, one requiring that men vest their allegiance not in their class, but vest their allegiance in their state. This new version of socialism was to be known as fascism. So understand that fascism was born out of a failure of Marxism, and it's at this time that Hitler's group undergoes a name change. They go from being called the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Nationalsozialisten in German, or in English, Nazis is what we call them, to reflect the new allegiance to the state. So now that you know the founder, now that you know more about its product, now that you know the name, you should be able to see pretty clearly that this chart is a bunch of BS. This essentially is the chart that the media is feeding you when they use phrases like right-wing fascism, or they tell you that fascism is on the right. But now that you're informed, can you see why this chart is wrong? First of all, I didn't create this chart. I found this chart online, and let me talk to you about why it's dead wrong. But this is precisely the chart that they're feeding to you and your children disguised as education. Let's talk about why it's wrong, though. What this chart is supposed to depict is where Democrats are, to the left of center, and where Republicans are, to the right of center. But it shouldn't take you long to figure out what's wrong with this picture. Democrats believe in more government, so the more to the left you go, the more government you'll have. Republicans believe in less government, so the more to the right you go, the less government you'll have. Does that make sense? Well, in my very first podcast, when I was explaining to you what conservatism is, we talked about minimal government, and I referenced that in 1929, the federal expenditures only totaled 3% of our national debt. 3%. 3% is nothing. You probably tipped your waitress more than 3% the last time you went out to eat. At least I hope you did. Well, what would be more conservative than 3%? Zero? Yeah, zero government would definitely be more conservative than 3%. But wait a minute. Even conservatives aren't talking about no government. That's crazy talk. That's chaos. That's Wild Wild West. That's anarchy. But notice someone's put fascism over here to the right. That's more government. That absolutely makes no sense at all. Their whole story is bogus. Someone explained to me how in the world three leftists can come together to invent a new version of socialism and the right gets blamed for it? Absolute nonsense. So what's the motivation for keeping up such a blatant lie? They're trying to avoid you seeing this. If you saw this, you might never vote for a Democrat again. This is the correct chart. I didn't make this one either, by the way, but it's the closest thing I found to anything accurate. I would make one correction, though. This chart has fascism and communism together. I wouldn't put them together like that. Going from right to left, I would say socialism, fascism, then communism. But let's get back to this cover-up. If you paid attention while I was mentioning the history of fascism, I mentioned that Hitler, Mussolini, and Gentile were all socialists. Well, Democrats were socialists too. And after the atrocities of both Hitler and Mussolini, Democrats had to start rebranding themselves so that they could distance themselves from both Hitler and Mussolini. And part of the rebranding process was the elimination of the S word, no more referring to themselves as socialists. Don't believe me? Take a look at this video of Maxine Waters when she accidentally let the word socialist slip from her mouth.
What what guarantees are you going to give this liberal about how that will reduce the cost of gasoline at the pump if we let you drill where you say you want to drill?
I can guarantee to the American people, because of the inaction of the United States Congress ever increasing prices unless the demand comes down, and the $5 will look like a very low price in the years to come if we are prohibited from finding new reserves, new opportunities to increase supplies.
And guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing, would be about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies.
Now, why would she stutter over the word socialism? It's not like it was a curse word or anything. Republicans say the word socialism all the time. We're not stuttering about it. We're not scared of the word. Seems like the only people who are scared of the word are the ones who've got something to hide. Then there's the time that Jim Carrey appeared on the Bill Maher show and said this.
We have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything. We have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything.
That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? Say yes to the word and everything? Aren't you implying that there was something wrong with the word? Well, Republicans were never scared of the word. There's only one party that's ever been scared to utter the S word. It's Democrats. Democrats managed to hide their little socialism secret all the way up into the year 2016. In the year 2016, something happened that changed everything. A candidate named Bernie Sanders came out and admitted he was running as a socialist. Now, he tried to clean it up, of course, by calling himself a democratic socialist. No such thing. But nevertheless, he was and is a socialist. And once he came out, holy smokes, it's like the floodgate opened. All of a sudden, Democrats could finally be honest for once. Suddenly, AOC was running as a socialist, Beto O'Rourke running as a socialist, Andrew Gillum, Ilhan Omar. Before you knew it, the entire party was crawling with socialists. Or were they always? I said there was a lot to unpack in this episode, and yet there's so much that I still haven't touched on, like the phony party switch story, which I'll have to touch on in a future podcast. Hopefully you've learned something. If nothing else, it sparks a conversation that's long overdue for us to have as a country. This is one of the reasons for the tug of war in the black community amongst black Democrats and black Republicans, because you still have black Democrats who'd rather believe CNN and Google than to believe their own eyes. Remember my friend who I made the challenge to in my soapbox segment about PayPal? Well, I made another challenge to him. He always insists that the white supremacy rhetoric always comes from the right. And I always remind him that we live in Georgia, a state that was smack dab in the center of the Civil War. I told him if he really wants to see who the racists were, all he has to do is get in the car with me and we can go for a ride around Georgia. There's still a lot of evidence here. They haven't renamed all of the streets yet. Somebody's busy cleaning up their fingerprints. He never took me up on this challenge either. Right now, as you watch this, Democrats are still trying to figure out what to do with Stone Mountain in Georgia. Now that more people are knowledgeable of the Democrat faces that are carved in the side of Stone Mountain, more people are woke and have become offended, and suddenly the park is closed until further notice, like the mountain hasn't been here all this time. This mountain is the exact same place where the KKK used to hold their meetings. The KKK was the intimidation arm of the Democrat Party, much like Hitler's brown shirts and Mussolini's black shirts. But that was then, right? Have things changed? The Democrat Party will still send Antifa to beat you up if they find out that you're talking about freedom on a college campus or something. Isn't it weird how a group called anti-fascists are actually fascists? Well, we'll never get it all, but we did unpack a lot. In this episode, we uncovered the word everyone seems to use but can't define. Fascism, right? We talked about why the word fascism has become popular in recent years. We talked about how the media covers for the left. We talked about the history of fascism and its founder, Giovanni Gentile. We talked about why fascism is on the left and not the right. We talked about the motivation for them to keep this lie going, and finally, why 2016 changed everything. Well, this concludes today's podcast. Make sure you stick around for our next podcast because some of you hate capitalism and you don't even know what it is. Believe it or not, I'm going to end this segment with some words from a rapper, I kid you not, named KRS-One. What's important is your awareness. Once you become aware, you are free. The brain can't see without words, It can notice things, but without a word to describe it, your brain can't see it. The things you become aware of are really determined by your vocabulary. The less words you know, the less you can see in your environment. The truth is, we're not trapped by any government. We're trapped by our own ignorance. I'm Rob Lett, and I approve this message.